Okay, so first let me thank all the panelists for making it out here. The idea of having a panel discussion was so that we have some time for you to engage. I mean, sometimes these technical conferences can be fairly monotonous and lots of technical presentations and very short time for questions. So here we've divided this into kind of 3 parts. So roughly half an hour for each part. First, I have 2 questions for each of the panelists. And then the third half hour is where you ask questions. And there'll be 2 mics, but I highly encourage you to actually write down something while we discuss so that you won't forget what we discussed. And so to start off, let me introduce the panel. It's in no particular order, but since you can read this, maybe you can't. I will just say what I know personally about them. I don't need to read what is already on the screen. So Nuwan is first up, Nuwan Senaratna. There are at least 2 others with that name. 5, okay. Not a stranger because he graduated from UCSC and then he went for his postgraduate to Stanford, and then after that he joined Facebook, and he's been coming almost every year and talking to our students, and he's the one who introduced us to MapReduce and so many other things. And so he's decided to come back and set up his own thing at a time when everybody else is trying to get out of this place. So Nuwan is a person who is not your typical computer science graduate. So please read his blogs on Medium. Okay, second up is Surangika. I have to thank Nalaka for saying that if we don't have Surangika, we'll be a manel. How do you say manel? Yeah. Because it's all males. But Surangika is from the University of Moratuwa. She's on the faculty there, and it will be right to say that she's the person who really introduced natural language processing in that faculty. And she is very active in the space of using machine learning and deep learning for natural language processing tasks. Then it's Nalaka Gunawardena, who's probably, I think when Sri Lanka didn't have something called a science writer, he became a science writer. I mean, so he obviously made a kind of a job for himself or a profession for himself, whereas in other parts of the world there are such people, but Nalaka is a very rare person, and he is very active on social media, and he is basically speaking at every other meeting I know where they're discussing anything to do with ICTs and how they affect our daily lives and how it affects ordinary citizens. Shehan Pereira is also no stranger because he comes to do all kinds of examinations at the UCSC. He is currently the head of the computer science and engineering at the University of Moratuwa, and he's probably the person the first returnee in this space of data mining and machine learning, and so he's a veteran, though he looks very young still. He's also the head of their data search center and doing a lot of interesting things. He's the one who introduced me to what's the Kaggle competitions. And then finally, Buddy Lianage, you have already met because he did the keynote. He is, of course, absolutely known to us because He comes also about once a year, once in 2 years. And he's also a resource person for our security master's programs. And when he's here, he does almost everything to do with security. And he's been in several jobs, but I will not talk about it. All these people have brilliant LinkedIn profiles. You can go and see what they've done. And so you can also see that there is quite a lot of breadth here. Different people with slightly different kind of views on the topic, which is AI and the future of computing. So to start us off, let me first check my time. Yeah, so we are a bit behind time. So my question is to do with what are the research and development priorities for Sri Lanka in the face of the current kind of trends in AI, big data, security and so on. And since each of them have a different kind of experience they bring to this, I've asked them to speak about slightly different aspects. Can we start with Shehan? Sorry, so there should be another free mic. There should be a non-wired mic also there somewhere. There is? No, it's okay.
Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this session. With respect to, since we are making sure that we spend only 5 minutes on each round, so I'll just go into the 3 areas that I thought of sharing for this thing. Yeah, first thing is with all the development that is happening out there, I would suggest that and it's also once again coming from my experience, collaborative and what you call multidisciplinary type of research should be targeted, especially at this juncture, when also looking at the situation where we are, because we do have, when you look at what's happening out there, we do have data owners and we do have certain decision makers who use whatever that needs that is produced by some of these applications, and we do have the practitioners, the researchers who are working on this, and maybe some other domain experts. So in my opinion, one major thing we should try to do is try to target on multidisciplinary and collaborative research in this area, because compared to other places, now only we are trying to get into this digital policy on the use of digital stuff in the country. So some other countries, there are a lot of restrictions, but here we are still in a situation where we can exploit that. Although I don't say the data is available, there are issues with getting data available, but when you look into it, if you can come up with a policy where they enable us to share the data for research and innovation, I think that is one thing that we should try. One other big thing that we can gain by doing that is, I said decision makers, because we do have a lot of hippos in the decision making process, right? Hopefully you know what hippo is. Highest paid person's opinion, right? So that's what happens in most of the decision making. I would suggest that by going into collaborative research, especially in domains where we can use it for policy making and decision making, we can make a difference in this juncture because of the availability of technology. And also something that is very, very close to that is, since we do have opportunity of getting access to data, we should also look at privacy preserving type of research on how to do that, because other countries, they can't even think about it because they are all locked up. Some places it's locked up, especially in Europe, right? So we can look into that. Earlier it was called privacy preserving data mining, data science. Now it's privacy preserving data AI, but whatever you call it, that's an area we can look at. Yeah, and the third one I was looking at is take advantage of the human resource pool that we have in the country and try to go for areas where we can actually try to, all these are related, repurpose the data that we have, right? So I can give you an example of CDRs, I see call detail records that we have been using for so many, we have been using for different things. What I'm trying to say is the things that maybe other places, other countries are unable to do, we can try to maximize on that, exploit that, and try to come up with innovative ways of using them, so that we can go from where we are, use R&D to go to the next level. I could give one small example. Am I within the time? Or small example. Recently, I don't know whether you were whether you were aware of it. There was this recently Dialogue had a datathon where they actually released CDR data, pseudo-anonymized CDR data for 2 days on a secure virtual environment, and asked these groups, students and practitioners, to come and do innovative stuff and come out with some innovative stuff. I was fortunate to be one of the judges there, so I got the opportunity to see what they can do, right? In my opinion, that those types of things can be done here, but most probably will not be possible to be done in other places, so I think we should exploit on that.
Thank you. So lots of things there. One is about this whole area of this hippos. This I think some of us are in some group these days in Parliament.
Yeah, actually that reminded me.
Yeah. And also the whole thing about, we were just discussing during tea time about whether the privacy concerns should remain with the individual users, or taken care of by a layer of encryption, so that the data mining will be done on an encrypted data. Yes, so thank you. So let's come down this way, and I've asked Surangika to just talk about, so it's not just the research, but also the teaching. So how do we, what do we teach in the light of, kind of Andrew Ng and all these people's material already being out there for people? What do we do in universities? I mean, what's our job? No.
Well, I think in Sri Lanka and many other countries, this AI and data science jobs are coming up, and I think in the times to come, a career in AI or data science would be considered as a skilled profession, like a software engineer or quality assurance or lawyer, whatever it is. So I think we have to be prepared to make those professionals. Right, so if we think, okay, people can rely on this Coursera material and all, I don't think it is going to create that professional we would need, because it's not that they know how to get machine learning algorithm to run for a given set of data and get results. So there are many things involved. They have to work in a team environment with software engineers, project managers, QA people, and then they have to know about the data ethics, and then they have to know about these standardization things in the environment, and then they have to think about the practical aspects, right? So for example, if someone would say, okay, my algorithm solves this problem marvelous with about 100% accuracy, but it takes about 100 days to train, right? I mean, it's not practical, so they should know how to balance these different aspects of this machine learning and all these things, and give a cost-effective solution to the industry. I mean, whatever we do should, the professional should be able to serve the industry and the academic field. So it should be practical. So to get that overall knowledge, I think it is very important we have a very well organized set of courses within the local universities. And the other thing is, if you look out in Coursera, Udemy and all, there are a lot of courses, right? So about mathematics or machine learning, and the machine learning, deep learning. So if someone like a student who just completed this school, how do you know what to follow? Right, so what is a set of, we in formal higher education, we talk about this constructive alignment and this graduate profiles. How do you know what he should follow to create that graduate profile for him? So there should be a guided course, a degree program, so that that burden of identifying what to do and when to do the different areas should be given by a full, well-planned university program. And the other thing is, there's a problem, there's a serious concern about the quality, not the quality of the lecture materials of these online forums, but the quality of how the assessment is done to give the certificate. For example, for many of these Coursera courses, for the program assignment, if you Google, you can easily find the answers, right? So you can simply modify and submit and get your certificate. So then how are you going to identify whether the qualification they got through these online courses is actually showcasing the capabilities of the holder of that certificate. So in contrast, in a university environment, we all do these group assignments and this individual assessments and face-to-face vivas. With all that, we can easily evaluate people. So it's very difficult. More difficult to escape the assessment procedure in these local universities than compared to what this assessment procedure in Coursera kind of online environment. So I think we can really capitalize on that aspect and identify the weaknesses of those online programs and provide a good learning experience to our graduates.
So thank you. So you are saying that we currently are in a kind of a romantic era where we are like so taken up by this technology and we are, it's like magic.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's bad, right?
So
It's very good if you want to learn something very specific, go and follow a Coursera course, follow the material, do the exercises genuinely. But you can't fully rely on that.
So we need to kind of professionalize the field, something like that, yeah. Okay, but I also want some panel people to kind of, oppose, challenge, and because I'm sure there'll be some people who will say, Andrew Nung is better than you, in explaining how these things work, kind of, yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to Nuwan. Again, I've asked him to look at the R&D side and more about how to make Sri Lanka, kind of leapfrog or what is the kind of place we have given that our numbers are small.
Does this work? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
I think you need to increase the volume of that mic a bit.
Okay, so maybe this question, what should Sri Lanka do? What should we do? We can break it into two halves. One is things that others have done, which we should do, and then things that others have done, which we haven't done. And sorry, you can break it even further and say things that others haven't done also and we should do. And then you don't have to worry about things that others haven't done and we shouldn't do. Okay, so I think in the first group, things that others have done and we should do, there is a sort of a whole common space of hardware, software, kind of techniques, processes, which we know works quite well, and that is basically as part of the same process of kind of learning what's going on everywhere and kind of picking that up. So while that's a very broad and useful topic, it's not very interesting. For me, what's slightly more interesting, what are things that others have done and we shouldn't do? And so I think one thing that Shehan touched on earlier was on these questions like privacy. Now, we look at privacy from a kind of a very human point of view because there are human implications, but there are also implications which are deeply ingrained in in what computer science is, for example. So the core of privacy is that computation and visibility of data at the moment is in the same place, meaning you can't compute on data if you can't see the data. Now that is an assumption which is fairly strongly ingrained in sort of classical computer science, if you like. But you can break that assumption. So for example, Shehan mentioned like various types of data mining which anonymize data and protect privacy. And there is an extreme of that where you can completely anonymize data and completely encrypt data and still do meaningful computation on that. So I think there are some assumptions in computer science which have been strongly held that must be broken. And so we don't need to make those same mistakes that have been made in the past. So I think privacy, computation, visibility, that kind of visibility versus computation, that's a really important kind of myth which we can try to break. That's one. Another, again, I'm going to talk in terms of computer science principles because like first principles are kind of interesting. Another principle of machine learning, AI, but also computer science in general is that computers reduce dimension. You get some data and dimensions are reduced. Like that's because all computations are mathematical functions and mathematical functions reduce, they don't increase. Now, that's how does that sound like in normal kind of layman's term? Problems like bias, like you have a machine learning model and let's say it's a machine learning model for recruiting, and then you find out that everyone who is hired is a male. Now that's an example of a bias which a machine does by nature, because it reduces data. It takes all the garbage that has been put out and then reduces it into a kind of a smaller set of garbage, so dimensionality reduction. So that's another assumption that we can break, and here the solution is slightly different, where we reduce our reliance on just machines and try to figure out where can we put the human in the loop as well. So for example, if you have a system which does kind of says filters resumes for recruiting, you need to figure out where you can put the humans in the loop to remove that bias, or at least identify that there is a bias. So I think there have been a lot of mistakes made in computer science, even in like hallowed places, like say like the top research universities or like Silicon Valley or like elite companies like Google. So if you consider what I said, the likes of Google, Facebook, Amazon are the people who make these mistakes the most. So we should not kind of follow those examples. And so the last I think group is what are the things that people haven't done we should do. It's kind of the opposite of this. We should basically figure out, okay, what is the way of doing AI away from this old classical model in the new model. And the same applies to kind of computer science in general.
Thank you. Yeah. Sometimes when one talks, we need a bit of time to digest what he says. Yeah. But please do keep some notes and question during the question time. We'll move on to Nalaka, and I've also asked him to look at somewhat of this whole aspect of what do we teach, both in terms of, I think you'll have to get the other mic, yeah. In terms of obviously undergraduates, but also school and the general public.
So thank you for inviting me, and I think I'm the least technical on this panel, as evidenced by my having paper in hand when everyone else has a digital tool. I think this whole benefits and challenges of technology, data science for learning and teaching. It's an interesting one. Not just at undergraduate level, as you said, but also for all learning. In school, whether it's primary, secondary, or tertiary, as well as lifelong learning. Now, I look at it as a lifelong learner who's eager for new knowledge and clarity in that knowledge and understanding that new information and how it relates to myself and the world. So in that sense, I think the MOOCs, the Coursera's of this world that are now increasingly available, accessible, many of them for free or affordable, are in fact an interesting, welcome development. Are we in Sri Lanka ready for it? That is another question, because our very rigid education system, whether in schools or in higher education, is geared on teaching rather than learning. So our whole generations have been raised on taking down what the teachers say and then basically paraphrasing it at examinations. There are exceptions, of course, in individual students and teachers, but by and large, the system is still geared for teaching rather than learning. Well, with the new opportunities for learning anywhere, anytime, at any age, this model is challenged, and I don't think at policy level or at the institutional level in Sri Lanka we are ready yet to address how things are changing and moving from teaching to learning, and then what it means, the benefit it means for everyone, including the overburdened school system, then the perversions of tuition and the vicious examinations and all that. Can we see a way of breaking away, slowly weaning away from this rigid system, thanks to opportunities now opening up with open learning? That is worth definitely discussing more. Now, what's happened is with the MOOCs, it's as Surangika said, there are issues of assessment, And the same concerns, generic concerns, were raised a generation ago when open distance learning was being promoted by the British Open University as well as by our Open University in the 80s and 90s. There were skeptics. There were people who said, well, how are you going to ensure proper structured learning? And at the same time, the body of experience shows that different methodologies would work, provided there is readiness in our minds, in our system, in our employment market for those who qualify, not just from conventional formal education, but open distance learning and now open online learning systems. So for that, certain things have to fall into place. And so the question is, will UCSC or University of Morocco have to compete with MIT or Stanford or Singapore's NTU kind of online open learning? Yes, that is certainly a possibility, a near future scenario. So MOOCs, in my view, can impart knowledge and skills where our universities, our systems of learning can bring in the unique input is in context. In contextualizing the knowledge and the skills for problem solving in our own situations. And that, to me, is where we should look at in ICT, looking at the socio-political, the cultural, the economic aspects of it. So it's not just technology or knowledge for its own sake. And the unintended consequences that I have written and spoken a lot about of ICTs, and of AI and machine learning and data science now as they proliferate. In a society like ours, which is in my characterization, an immature democracy, where active citizens are very few and lacking, where governments like to basically be authoritarian given half a chance, and where the rule of law is not well entrenched and established. So in such a scenario, there can be unintended consequences, which we can explore in the next conversation presently, but we, I think, need to provide that context to all learners, and that can only come from a country-specific understanding. So MOOCs can be the starting point, but the polishing off and the contextualizing can definitely come from our institutions and systems of learning and higher learning. And when we keep learning, we will, I think, also need a marketplace, employers who are willing to consider those who have come from different paths of learning and certification, not just from the conventional universities, but from Coursera's and from other modes that are increasingly common. So will our employers consider them on par, or will there be a different kind of a hierarchical consideration? So these are issues that need some thought.
Thank you. So yeah, I think if we turn it the other way around, we can say, okay, we let Coursera teach them, but we examine them. So yeah, if we want to avoid the kind of thing that Surangika was referring to. Finally, Buddy, I think again, because he's involved in security related things and has that international experience, what do you think when you see the kind of human resources we have? I mean, we can't, for instance, do what India is doing. So are there any insights into, what should we be researching about, or, yeah.
So, thank you very much for inviting me into this panel. I would initially sort of disagree with your statement about can we do as much as India? We can. It's all in the mind. I think we all have a very low view of our capabilities. We can do more. We just need to try a bit harder. Being the last in the panel to speak, I have the advantages of being able to challenge some of the statements. And I mean, I agree with a lot of the things that were said, But in terms of what we need to do in the field of AI, in my opinion, we also need to look at the the country strategy. Where are we going? What are we hoping to do? Because whatever AI can do, we need to try and gear our education and our teaching and the learning to what the country needs to offer. If you take Singapore, for example, most of their teaching is geared towards a company called Singapore, which is what they are actually trying to achieve. So I'm not saying that the whole thing has to be industrialized, but research also needs to be considered in the context of the country's sort of strategy towards the future. In terms of security, there are lots of good innovative techniques of encryption and anonymization and making sure individuals can share information without much concern. Now, in the keynote speech, one of the things I mentioned was that taking control of privacy and making the data owner part of that conversation, which I believe is still true, because ultimately privacy is a private thing. It's what you want to keep private, and you are the ultimate controller of that information. So I talked about personal privacy policy, which we all have in our heads, which we look at, and whatever we do in AI, in creating the environments, creating the methods and formulae, we just need to remember that individuals have their own privacy policies, and we just need to be mindful of that. I also look at the risks and opportunities of any endeavor. So what are the risks in AI? I think that's been discussed quite a lot, but what are the opportunities? As I was talking to colleagues during tea time, we tend to look at risk assessments only. We hardly do opportunity assessments. Have you heard of a teaching topic called opportunity assessment? Not a lot. But what we are basically doing is doing a risk assessment to support opportunities. So what's the opportunity here? Using AI for the benefit of Sri Lankans and the Sri Lankan environment and the society in general. So let's look at the opportunities first and then manage the risks, underlying risks, naturally. So I would like to emphasize that let's do the risk and opportunities management at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, so what I wanted us to look at was what are the implications in terms of taking the technology forward, in terms of research and in terms of education. And then, of course, we need to also look at what is the implications to countries like ours in terms of social effects, social impact. I think both Nalaka and Buddy have already touched on that. And to be fair by all the members, maybe we go the other way around this time and ask Buddy to start off our citizens. We know we boast about a literacy rate of 94% or something, which means basically you can write your name, I think, in some language. In a situation like that, and also in the situation that Nalaka mentioned about, to have democracy, you got to have, you assume a certain kind of education, equitable kind of education. In the lack of that kind of situation, this technology and what it can do to you and from you, how do we kind of respond to that?
So I believe that we need to get rid of the ignorance of what we are trying to do, because sometimes ignorance of the technology, ignorance of the benefits of AI can be a burden on how people take on that subject, how people approach that subject, even respond to the learning and the teaching that is being provided. So it is a case of approaching it in a way that we educate the users on the benefits and also make sure that the risks are properly managed.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is like everything in computing, there is hype, and this has hyper hype. AI. The other day I saw some Huawei phone, and it said it has 4 AI cameras. I don't even know what it means because there were only 2 lenses, but 4 AI cameras. And then I also saw a blog by one of our friends who said, there's, people are talking about machine learning and all, and but that's not AI. AI is this, and basically referring to the Turing test, and so we need. I fully agree that we need to kind of. We probably should have put something up there on what we understand as AI. Yesterday I did that in my talk, but because that definition has kept changing as well.
I mean, I have a personal view of artificial intelligence as very high-speed computing, which if humans had the brain power to do, they would do it much better themselves.
Okay, so let's move on to Nalaka. On this aspect of you already did touch on some of these aspects, but more from an education point of view. What about from daily life, of everyday individuals out there in society? I mean, should we burden them with this kind of knowledge, or should we just keep them in this way? Ignorance is bliss kind of thing, or what's your take on this?
Well, I'm sorry to have missed your talk yesterday, Ruan, which perhaps would have been very enlightening for me. As I said in the last answer, context is everything. And whatever specific technology we are talking about, the context and who is using it for what purpose, with what impacts and what costs is, I think, the most important question. So I'm not hugely cheering AI or trying to be a neo-Luddite and cry wolf about AI. All I'm saying is that we should have an informed discussion about it and explore different scenarios. So that's point number one. Or to put it in another way, it's not the machines that we should fear, it's some humans. Some humans who would leverage machines for control or for profit or both, and how that will then impact the rest of us. It can be in many, many different ways. So the critical questions in terms of societal impacts of AI, I would say are the following. Who deploys AIs, the different applications of AI? For what explicit and implicit purposes? That's the second question. Third question is, under what regulatory framework and with what level of accountability and ethics? So these are the 4 questions, or 5 if ethics can be taken separately. These are the questions we should ask about any technology. Certainly the now well-established ICTs, we did ask these questions in the 90s and later, and now we need to ask it about all the upcoming or emerging or already emerged technologies. Because without regulations and ethics, AI can enhance existing biases and aggravate the existing power structures. But at the same time, I agree there is a danger of over-regulation, stifling innovation, or killing entrepreneurship. So it's a fine balance that societies and governments have to achieve. And it's not a case of banishing AI, it's what I call AI plus plus plus. The three pluses are clear regulatory framework, that's the first plus. Second plus is ethics, ethical guidelines. And the third plus is research that monitors ongoing societal impacts of these new technologies. And all three pluses, if they are in place, then a new technology, including AI technologies, can certainly be integrated into problem solving. I'm reading a very interesting book at the moment, which is on smart cities. This whole premise of smart cities is based on technology and data can solve urban problems, from traffic to waste disposal to reducing crime to other urban challenges. The premise of smart cities, which India has embraced, which we are talking about, our policymakers have been talking without really doing it, talking about turning Kandy into a smart city or Colombo into a smart city. The whole premise has been questioned by this author, who's the former data scientist of the city of Boston. He's Ben Green. He's now a fellow at Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. But having been inside a city government, having been part of these conversations and debates, he takes a critical look. And the title of his book is Smart Enough City, putting technology in its place to reclaim our urban future. So in a nutshell, what he's saying is, we need to take technology as part of the solution and not be defined by technologies as the sole problem solver. He cites three examples, which I'll very quickly mention, because that highlights the dangers of being techno-driven completely. One is MIT researchers, a group of researchers had come up with intelligent intersections using data and scenarios. They have come up with intelligent intersections for cities that will soon have a lot of autonomous or self-driving vehicles. Now there's one problem with it, that the intelligent intersections would enable smooth passage for vehicles, autonomous vehicles, but it did not have any place for pedestrians. It basically assumed pedestrians will find other ways of crossing streets. So that was very myopic and kind of what he calls techno goggles, where if you put on just the technical solution kind of vision, it narrows the vision. Second example is predictive policing, which growing number of police departments in the US have now adopted, which basically means machine learning algorithms analyze recent past crime patterns and narrow down areas of a city or a neighborhood which are more crime prone, predict other trends like what time, what kind of petty or serious crime, and so on. I mean, we know all that. And the problem is algorithms are imbued with racial bias. So, for example, there is an overestimation of crimes happening in neighborhoods with lots of minorities. And there's an underestimation of crime happening in white neighborhoods. And so the human bias has now come into the predictive policing algorithm, and that is aggravating existing tensions between police and community. So again, a cautionary tale. And then there was I'm going to skip the third example, but basically what Ben Green says is smart, yes, but smart needs to be accompanied or redefined as sensitive, caring, and equitable, and not just efficient and convenient, because smart cities is usually seen as, oh, it'll solve all our problems by making it efficient, convenient, but it's only a start. So we need to look at all technologies, whether in relation to smart cities or to other applications, as a starting point, as part of a larger conversation where social scientists need to get involved, where activists, policymakers, community representatives all need to be involved, and only then we will get that mix right. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yeah. So I mean, that's a challenge for us in the universities also. Do our students, read as widely into this kind of area as they do into algorithms and techniques. So that's a good challenge. I think when we interview people, we realize that they are like really good technically, but their vision with respect to how these things affect society is fairly short-sighted. Nuwan? Yes.
You said that we had a similar discussion in ICT in 90s. Do you think we succeeded or just yes, no, not elaboration? Not really. Yeah, so we should be careful this time. Yeah.
Nuwan, yes.
Let me piggyback on a bunch of things the panel said. So it's interesting that we're having a good discussion about AI without kind of concretely defining what AI is, but that's the status quo that happens everywhere. Like no one really knows what AI is. But like my personal definition is kind of similar to what Buddy said, like high speed, high performance, solving hard problems. But I also kind of ignore the definition of AI because I think there's a more interesting definition which is on the side of AI, which is okay, there's a class of problems that machines can solve, like AI problems, but there's also a class that they can't, and that's what's left to the humans to solve. So for me, the HI, if you like, human intelligence is a lot more interesting than artificial intelligence because that's the thing that has to go in and fill in all these gaps. So when Alka said that there's this predicting high crime in minority areas, some human needs to go and solve that problem because that is a problem, because that's a problem that turns into a vicious cycle and aggravates. So I think from a societal point of view, I think we need to figure out like, okay, we've done a lot of thought into AI, we also need to think about HI because like it or not, AI is replacing human employment and there has to be something else to replace that, and there hasn't been enough thought into what humans are going to do. But there are a lot of interesting areas which humans can do things which they can't do in the past. So in the past, humans had to work in like high labor intensive things because they had to do it. Now there is time, but we haven't figured out what to do with that time. So I think that's probably one of the most important societal questions. Connecting it up with the discussion we had on things like Coursera and kind of the nature of education, I think the nature of education has to piggyback on that. So our education system is probably has its roots 2,200 years ago when the British civil service wanted to create civil servants, so everyone who looked exactly alike, and so they were all given a bunch of standard skills. And if you think of our education, like even though at a university level it's different, if you take primary, secondary level, basically it's the same education. Everyone is given the same education, kind of. So I think that's the other thing. Like you can't have humans do intelligent tasks if they are educated like machines. Right? So that's probably the other big societal area to kind of figure out is education. I think third thing is there is a lot of hype about AI, but there's also a pragmatism about AI as well. So I moved back to Sri Lanka in October, and one of the most kind of inspiring experiences that I had was working with this AI startup, which was founded by two guys who are about like, I think 5 or 6 years younger than me. They're not from Colombo University or Morato University. One is from Uva University. The other one is from Rajarata University. So kind of less well-known universities. They founded a company, not in Colombo, in Kuliapitiya, which you can think of it as like a third-tier city. If Colombo is 1, Kurunegala is 2, Kuliapitiya is like a third-tier city. And they founded a company there. And they are building AI-related software helping small and medium businesses. And at the end of this year, so this is just a projection, they haven't quite got there, but their revenue is going to hit $500,000. So a company in Kuliapitiya, $500,000 using AI. And what I like most about it is they have a very pragmatic view of AI. For them, AI is not a hype, AI is not a risk, AI is a tool which you can make use of. So I think we should also focus on, okay, there are a lot of interesting problems which can be solved using AI. We should focus on using it as a tool and like making it a tool as opposed to making it like a kind of a god or an idol or something like that. So I think from a societal point of view, like that's my kind of feeling about AI.
Thank you. And Surangika?
Yeah, I would also like to add to what Nuan just said. So, I mean, the AI can be used to solve, small specific problems rather than trying to solve, trying to have moonshot projects. So, just like the two guys, the graduates he just mentioned, I think they are using AI to solve very small specific problems using AI as a tool. So, on the other hand, this moonshot kind of project might not work for everyone. So, everyone has to be cautious about that. And so in recent there was an article in Harvard Business Review. So they interviewed many executives and managers from different companies who are using AI or working on AI projects. So that was the general consensus that you can't, most of the time this low-hanging fruits kind of projects would succeed rather than trying to go for this very large projects. And so they gave a very nice example that there's this company called MD Anderson. It's a cancer research institute, and in 2013 also they started a project using IBM Watson. So their plan was to use IBM Watson to fully predict, so diagnose and prescribe a treatment plan for cancer patients. So by 2017, the cost of the project was about $64 million US, but the project has not completed. So, but at the meantime, in other departments, other teams are using AI to solve small, achievable goals, and they have succeeded. So, and in Sri Lanka, given our circumstances, I think we also have to be very careful on that. The other thing I want to highlight is this importance of data. If you look at these, all these giants in AI, the universities or companies, they really exploit the available data. So if you look at the research papers in, let's say, image recognition or classification written in early 2000, the data sets they talk about is about 1,000. But if you look at the data sets they use now, millions, right? So what did they exploit? The internet and these cheap phones, people take photos and upload, right? And look what Facebook did. So, and about, when we started use Facebook, we had to go and tag our faces. But now Facebook does it for us. And Facebook now is a pioneer in the deep learning and that kind of research. They were not like that when they started. So then they really exploited the data, and then they developed the algorithms to take benefit of the data. So I think we also have to think about collecting data and data specific to us. Another thing is now, with respect to natural language processing, now the giants like Google and Facebook are looking into these low resource languages. So like Sinhala or Tamil, because if you look at the internet, English is not the only language. So they have to support all the this high-level AI things for other languages also. And if they don't have the tools, if they don't have the data, their algorithms will not work. So there's a research niche for us, I think, in that aspect to see how we can, since we have the problems, right? So the machine, Sinhala English or Sinhala Tamil machine translation quality is much lower than English French machine translation. So the difference comes not from the algorithm but from the data. So what can we do with the resources we have? How can we leverage this and make sure these algorithms work for low resource data is one thing I think we should focus on, so that our country will also benefit.
Thank you. So finally, before Shehan talks, can I ask for two people to please stand on the two sides with the mics? We have two, right? So that, because we've eaten into some of the audience time, and hopefully we can get about 5 minutes from the next session. Yeah, Shehan.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to take it to the wider question of what would be the social implications of AI. So there's a lot of discussion going on with respect to the loss. As you all said, with this low-hanging fruit, or what we call a little bit of narrow AI, there's a lot of things that you can solve, right? So therefore, obviously, it's going to reduce the people who are doing certain jobs are not going to be able to do so jobs. And if you talk about the developing world, obviously, most probably they can handle it. But when it comes to our part, might be an issue with respect to what can be done. Fortunately or unfortunately, BPO did not take off, in my opinion, in Sri Lanka. So in that sense, we might be able to survive, but there will be situations where we will have to think about it seriously. Not to say that we should not have AI, but think about how we could go about it. The other aspect is, as with the hype of AI, there is general thing of hardcore computer science and engineering not getting that same interest and interest. So in my opinion, for AI to survive, we need to have the hardcore computer science and engineering. There's this huge trend towards coming up with degrees in AI and things like that. In my opinion, before doing that, we need to make sure that we have the hardcore AI and have the kids, secondary people interested in mathematics and the hardcore subjects that they should be interested in. Yeah, so I'll leave it there and ask the audience.
I think nobody really touched on the other view of AI, and we have been really looking at the narrow AI definition. But globally, I mean, I think there's a famous panel they put up with all these, the AI people, and they asked about the existential threat of AI, and those are the things that are really dominating them, because they are talking about artificial general intelligence and artificial super intelligence. But maybe we will, hopefully somebody may ask some questions about that.
I have a small experience I would like to share. So over the past 4 years in University of Moratuwa, we are developing this Sinhala Tamil machine translation system to be used by the government agencies to translate official government documents. So we released the first version to the official languages department, and the official languages department wanted to train the human translators to use this system. So how they sent the letter was in Sinhala, so machine translation system for Sinhala Tamil. So these people came and they really started to protest. So what are you guys doing? Are you trying to put us off our jobs? But I mean, they got the message wrong. So then we had a very hard time to explain these people, no, we are not going to get the machine to replace you. This is just to assist you. So I mean, that kind of problems will definitely come, especially from the government sector when you try to do these things. So we had to be very cautious. So that's first-hand experience we had.
Please, audience questions.
My question is not directly about the artificial intelligence, but my belief is future of computing is quantum computing. So I want to know about the research projects and which are going on about the quantum computing here in Sri Lanka, and the problems and barriers that we are having as students. What are the resources and courses we are having in Sri Lanka?
Okay, so in this round I will kind of randomly pick somebody, because we are not going to have much time and we want to take as much questions as possible. So can I ask Nuwan to just get back on that? Quantum computing, I don't know, did you hear the question? Yeah. Yeah.
I might not have the best answer because I'm not expert in quantum computing. There's one interesting problem that I'm actually working on related to this, which is more related to cryptography. Now, quantum computing can be used to kind of hack cryptographic systems. And so there's a lot of interesting research into how do you build cryptographic systems which can't be hacked by, which are kind of quantum computing proof. So I think that's a very interesting area, because one of the risks of quantum computing is like, okay, what happens if the major cryptographic systems can be broken? So all encryption kind of breaks down, right? And that causes all kinds of problems. So if you're interested in that particular area, we could have a chat, but unfortunately my knowledge is restricted to that.
Yeah, okay, so so these are, they say game changers, and then they talk about singularity. So in terms of encryption, it will be like that point, no, of singularity, where you basically.
I think we can save encryption.
Okay.
So I have a question, couple of questions, and the
yes.
Well, artificial intelligence and the future of the computing, that is the topic you discuss with regard to the education and the social understanding. Well, in the last couple of years, it is sad to mention that the AI has become a kind of a political tool in this country to misguide the people about the subject. It's very sad sometimes. Some people believe that all the problems in the hospital could be solved in one night, just putting the AI. So it has become a tool of a god for our politicians. So that has created some sort of a misconception in the society. As we all know, even I learned the AI 30 years ago in this place. It's in one subject, but today's context is a domain knowledge. You see so many courses coming even in the machine learning to the so many. You start speaking so many things, and AI is a part of it. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate what is an AI and what is not AI. But the issue is, still we are teaching the AI, these hard subject, what Shehan mentioned, in the 3rd year or 4th year. The guys who are coming to the university, they not prepared to, we can't offer a course in the 1st year. Can we teach machine learning in the 1st year? No, because our students, these people, their background knowledge still in this country, they just still learn the old syllabus, and we are not going into the so-called dream world. And at the same time, in the real world, the problems, before you apply the AI to solve the problem, there is a gap between what we are in. For example, the gap with respect to the many other stuff. Maybe the data is not available, data is not electronic form, and there are other social issues where you can't apply. Even the hospital things could be there. At the same time, people are thinking AI has become a thing where everybody can learn. Now, when people start talking about what comes to my mind is the Chinese room example in the AI. You don't want it to know the subject to reply. You don't want to know the Chinese to reply in a Chinese letter. Somebody can learn the AI without knowing the context of the computing. Well, of course, in that context, some people are proposing BSc degree in AI. Okay, personally, I don't agree, because business specialization is important, but the background knowledge on the subject matter at the same time is critically important. So, with respect to the education side, there are lots of things to be done. General awareness is also important, because it's created some sort of a sad situation in the society about the because people believe that you can use AI to solve all the problems what we have it. So, comment and question, open to you.
So both a question and also a comment, but Buddy, you can.
So, I think we need to be very careful about the hype, the AI hype and the words, because we tend to latch on to a couple of words, big data, AI, sometimes for our own benefit. As academics, we need to be careful not to put too much emphasis on the artificial part of the AI, because like you mentioned, there is HI as well, human intelligence, and HI created, by the way, AI, not the other way around. AI didn't create HI, HI created AI. So the danger is there, but one of the things that they do in the West, Western schools, is some of these topics they bring at a very young age, so that when they come to university, they have the knowledge, not the wisdom, just the knowledge to distinguish between the hype and the fact. So some of these things need to be introduced not after in the first year of university, but in the ordinary O levels, the A levels. So there must be sufficient exposure. What does that mean? We probably need to reduce the syllabus of the current school work to put all these new things in. So I think you mentioned about some of the stupidity in our education system, whereby we put in a lot of information into the student and tell them to just bring it out at the exam, one by one. Not ask, not challenge. So we need to educate our children in a way that they can challenge our beliefs. They can challenge, what does AI mean? What are you doing with this? Is it beneficial? There is a point at which the commercial hype needs to be turned into practical reality. Yeah. So just need to be careful.
Thank you.
I have 3 questions. Sri Lanka has found a niche in nanotechnology, I think to a certain extent. What would be the niche equivalence in AI? Second one, the widespread use of machine learning frameworks for analytics. Will that reduce the analytical skills of those who are applying that, or they tend to blindly apply them in the future without having the necessary core competencies? Third one, there was a recent article on BBC about creative writing software. So it can maybe in the next few years or whatever decade equal the human competence in creatively writing. And what would be the creativity left for the humans thereafter? Thank you.
Okay, let's take it in the reverse order, because the first question is pretty hard, I think. But can we just take up this thing about creative writing? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that third question. Whether we like it or not, it's happening. I think there will soon be not just prose, but also verse writing software, and competitions between humans and machines for the literary merits. This is already being discussed in science fiction circles as a serious topic, because science fiction writers themselves are a bit concerned. You know, will very smart, creative machines put science fiction writers out of their jobs? Will they compete for readers? So there are certainly very interesting possibilities. But again, my personal answer is, just like a very good teacher cannot be replaced by a machine, a very good creative writer, a very good creative person, human, cannot be replaced, maybe augmented, maybe because of the competition, he or she will become sharper and more creative, but not replaced. At least as a writer myself, I like to think so.
And the other aspect, that the machine won't get any thrill or satisfaction in doing it compared to you.
So we have ego, which is behind or the driving force of most creative outputs in arts, culture, literature. I'm not sure whether ego is an attribute of machines. Well, not as far as I've heard.
Okay, so the second question was use of analytics, yeah. And humans not becoming, losing that facility.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is correct, because we keep on using it, but there is a tendency that people will lose it, but we should not lose it, because otherwise, whatever the insights that we get out of these predictive analytics tools and other types of analytical tools, we should be able to interpret and use it in the proper way, especially in the cases of having bias and things like that. In that sense, we might be, it can happen, but what I'm saying is we should not lose it. We should make sure that it doesn't happen, because, add to this creative thing, just a side note, because some of our students used to do this to get away from the plagiarism tools by translating whatever they download into Chinese and then coming back again to English, so that they can fool the plagiarism tool. So those types of things will happen, especially with education. We were talking about education and making sure that people can't fool the systems, but AI can try to solve it, but once again, that's an area that we can look into.
Yeah, anybody wants to add something about analytical? Well, we are talking about slightly different types of analytics, I feel. This kind of analytics and the kind I learned from Mr. Abesing. But yeah, any
so
other?
I think to identify what analytical technique to use given the problem is will have to be done by the human. So then that is where the thinking comes, and like when you use calculator to add values, but then what to add you have to decide. So that kind of, in that sense, or the type of analytical expertise you should have and is required might change, but I think human will also always have to be in the loop, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I mean, of course, some of the technologies like, now we have deep learning, so we don't have to do feature engineering, and now we have auto ML, and so maybe we don't need to really worry too much. So these are real questions, but yeah, you're trying to answer the first one.
No, second. Quick comment. So think of the time then when people used to do very complex calculation using a slide rule.
Yes.
We don't use that anymore. But that doesn't, that hasn't reduced our analytical capabilities.
There was severe opposition in Morocco for using calculators.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we went from slide rule, the beads to the slide rule, and then to calculators, and we don't even use calculators anymore. It's automatically done. It's auto-calculated.
Anybody wants to have a crack at the first one?
What was it?
First one. First question was about, I think it's a bit premature still, but can we think in terms of identifying some niche areas? I think as a country in the IT exports, we have identified some areas, and those are the ones that are bringing good revenue. But in terms of AI, I think it's a bit premature. I don't know, unless any of you want to say something.
So niche areas come from, in a way, usability and exploitability. Can we do it for benefit? Because if it's a niche area but it doesn't get used and sort of exploited sufficiently, then it doesn't become a niche area anymore. So this is why I said that the country strategy, what's our IT strategy for the country is going to be. And depending on that, we can build on those niche areas. There's so many niche areas. You can take examples from all over the world. But what we do here will depend on what is needed to be done here as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, this question can be a sort of crazy question, but we have seen that there's erosion in attitudes.
Sorry?
Erosion in attitudes. So I don't know whether this AI framework, how these AI frameworks could be used to improve the attitudes of people, because now, day by day, our decisions are based on the information given by the machines. So I don't know whether we could use these AI frameworks to build the attitudes, good attitudes in people.
At least you can mind the attitudes.
to change attitudes, that's like the $64 million question, but yeah, okay. There's one brave panelist who wants to have a go at that.
So I'll pick one example of erosion of attitudes, which is conversation online, like the typical echo chamber thing where you either get a whole bunch of people agreeing with exactly the same thing, or very low quality conversation where you get down to the level of attacking people and so on. Now, to look at that through a computer science lens, that's also an example of kind of dimensionality reduction, where a small group is exposed to just things that they want to see, and they're also like just surrounded by people with the same views. Therefore, there is no expansion of their views. Their minds are getting narrow as opposed to expanding. So if we are smart as computer scientists, we know this problem. We've identified it. And so I think we can go and now that we've identified it, we can go and solve it. And I think there are many ways in which we can kind of expand as opposed to kind of reduce. There are many ways which we can kind of expand conversations online, expand the types of views people are being exposed to, as opposed to what's mostly happening at the moment, which is also driven by another factor, which is like the advertising model online, where, okay, how do you get people to like just click on so many things and so on. So I think it's related to a bunch of other things. I think it's strongly related to HI. It's also related to what Nalaka said about how does a machine augment as opposed to replace. So we need to figure out, okay, how can we get AI to augment our conversation online as opposed to kind of actually replacing it. When there is a conversation on comments on YouTube or whatever it is, actually what's happening is the machine has reduced the conversation so much, it's actually telling the humans what to say. It has gone down to that level. So we need to kind of turn that around.
But I also think that it's the way the business model works now in those platforms that we have those conversations. That's how the business model works. So unless we change the business model to monetize that user input for those people supporting it. Because, by the way, we don't pay for any of some of these platforms. Somebody else pays. We pay by purchasing what they advertise. So we need to, so the attitudes and things can be sort of reborn if we make sure that the the online business models can be adjusted.
I think yesterday's keynote had a few pointers to this. I think he kept on saying randomness is lovely, you know, so the idea that diversity is what brings you to a better solution, and I think several universities and companies overseas, they actually believe it, they put their money in it and recruit people who are diverse.
I find that question interesting, also because how to nurture better attitudes technologically or techno-mediated ways is being discussed in science fiction. And there's a Sri Lankan science fiction writer, Yudhanjaya Wijeratne, who's written a whole novel partly using this premise. Number Cast is a novel that came out 2 years ago. It's done very well internationally. He's definitely a star in writing original science fiction. He's a data scientist, still in his 20s. I'll highly recommend it. So one of the premises in this near future scenario is conversations where participants are public spirited and speaking in broader terms and without being narrow and petty, are aggregated and they are given higher scores, and that score becomes everything. Suddenly employers are looking at your composite score, suddenly bankers to consider your creditworthiness, look at how good you are in the public space in terms of your expressions and positions taken and opinions. So in a way, that's one scenario that can happen. But at the same time, it can go the other way too, and it creates a new caste system of people whose score is low, therefore they can't get credit from banks, they can't get jobs, because they've been these petty, narrow-minded, bickering people online on social media and other platforms, and therefore they have self-limited their scope. So interesting scenarios certainly possible. I would say Yudhanjaya Wijeratne is a person to watch, but also Philip K. Dick, who's written decades ago about many of these scenarios and challenges we are looking at now. I think every student of IT should read the science fiction of Philip K. Dick, whose stories have already been used for some of the Hollywood thrillers. This guy, who died in the 1980s, has foreseen many of the challenges we are grappling with as societies now.
Yes, so one of the interesting things Yudhanjaya says is that he pruned his Facebook friends to find the 50 who are most different from him. Very interesting. Yeah. Next question.
It's more of an extension to what Dr. Nalin asked. If you look at very soon, Uber cars will come without the driver because there are self-driving cars around. And iRobot has given this Roomba, which is auto-cleaning robot, where it self-charges itself. And it will be few years where you get a digital housemaid. So all the girls and boys who are coming from villages to help, especially in Sri Lanka, Colombo, will not have jobs. And I heard Oracle has released auto-tuning, so they don't need from the next version. Actually, you can actually not have a DBA in your office. So database administrators will not have a job. So what I'm asking is, like, there are different levels of jobs where the AI can assist, but there'll be lots of jobs that will be obsolete very, very soon. What will those humans do?
I'll give my personal view first. My personal view is we will adapt. Humans will adapt to all these changes. We did adapt from the Industrial Revolution to the mechanical revolution, the digital revolution, and we will continue to adapt. So jobs will be lost, and then jobs will be created. We just need to be prepared to move and change the focus of society, of our learning from one to the other. If you don't, by natural selection, we'll probably lose. But as a society, we will adapt.
But will there be a gap between the lower skilled ones losing their jobs and the adaptation, so that there will be maybe 10 years, 15 years, where lots of people lose jobs and not being able to retrain and reskill to adapt to the new opportunities. But the next generation will have those skills. So will there be a generation of misery?
But that I think the question itself had a good answer. So on the one end of the scale, the person who cleans the room, that job, but the other end is a highly skilled job, DBA. So it seems like these things don't respect that kind of hierarchy that we already have, which leads to what Buddy was saying. Then it becomes adaptability, and maybe that person in the village or whatever who is more adaptable than the guy who is the computer science degree. Yeah.
So I think the future has two variables. One was mentioned, which is that interim period, which might be painful. And I think there's a parallel with the climate as well. The world would probably not end, but there would be this interim period where things need to settle down and adjust to the new reality. So one variable is how long is that interim period going to be? Is it going to be 10 years or 100 years? The other variable is what is there at the other end of the road, which is there's a chance that it might not be what things are like now. There could be this kind of dystopia where you have this polar world where you get the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots live for the entertainment of the haves. So I think there are those two variables, and they are by no means decided. And when we say we will adapt, it's unknown to what we are going to adapt to.
But I think it's our constant thirst for knowledge and change and improvement that will sort of help us survive. Because think of it, 100 years ago, if you were in a place 100 years ago, would you think that we would be here, having a conversation with this equipment and technology? No. So we adapted. Obviously, that gap, what you mentioned, that's important. I sometimes think it's within our gift to make it as short as possible, or as long as we can bear. So,
is there one more very urgent question, or I asked Surangika to give a final thing? Okay, so.
Yeah, I just want to agree with what Buddy said. We will definitely adapt. If you think of the era where the computer was introduced, there was this same discussion. Will the human be replaced by computer? And we see today it has not happened, right? Different types of jobs were created, and the different professions were created. So I think we will, and if you think of this hundreds of years ago, Black Death, millions of people died, but then people adapted and Industrial Revolution came. So, and we have example from the history. And it's not in this field also, if you look at arts graduates, right? So now the government has a program to train them with IT skills. So they are, this kind of training will have to take place maybe for in this field also, but I think people will adapt and people will find solutions. So there will be a small problem, but I think we'll overcome.
We should, yes.
Small example of adapting, maybe the person who came to the city to do the cleaning will go back and engage in smart agriculture, because he or she came there because the agriculture was not making money for them, or it was not sustainable. But with the technology that we have, with the AI data science, we may be able to get him to adapt with good user interfaces and things like that, where he doesn't need to have a lot of skills to use tools to get it done. Just an example.
Thank you. So we need to finish. Otherwise, the organizers will pull us up. But we had to always finish with a bit of intrigue. So I thought on that thing about adaptation. So in other words, we are at the top of the food chain because of our adaptability, not because of our muscles or our teeth. Because the mammoths had much, more than that. So that raises the question that I raised yesterday. If something is more adaptive than us, are we willing to give up that place? And that's where the questions about existential threat of AI is coming. So thank you once again for a patient audience. Thank you to each of the panelists who have taken time out to come here in the middle of a big traffic block. And we hope we will interact more during the break. Thank you.